issue with that is if you've decided that it is an environment that does not bring out the best in your child, and even worse, may actually create a level of trauma or distress for them, again, as we know, that's not resilience building at all, then you're basically creating a decision that is meeting a short-term need and ultimately may lead to further problems down the track where we then have mental health issues and so forth. Hello Quantifolks, and welcome to another episode of Fark the Shoulds, little sister podcast Alchemising Education. We are kicking off season 2 in fashionably late style, and very much like a healing of the hymen, we are repopping our cherry and getting back into Curious Quinn's laughing at me getting back into this podcasting shenanigans because we've got some shit to say. Sorry, children. We've got some excrement to talk about. Anyway, I am delighted to join you. I am Jodi from QuantiMama, and I'm joined by
Curious Quinn. Thank you.
Curious as always. So Quinny's just laid the topic on me because, as you know, here at QM headquarters, we're really not into preparation.
No.
So what are we talking about on Alchemising Education today, Quinn?
Well, I really feel like we need to, or there's opportunities for us to consider that our kids can decide for themselves.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned in the preamble before we started recording that we, in season 1, we talked about the parents get to decide, and we were talking around, I guess, the handing back of responsibility and decision making to parents around their children's education and what that looks like, and it might be slightly outside the traditional. But the follow-up to that, I think you were talking about, was the kids get to choose, and there's real potency in education where it's kid-driven, which is something I feel really strongly about, as you know, because I'm running a real-time, real-world experiment on my children. And as I've said before, we'll find out in, 12 to 15 years if it doesn't work out and they're all in jail. I'm kind of hoping that won't be the case, and certainly with 4, you'd have to think the odds are pretty good that at least one will be there to put us in a nursing home when the time comes.
Yes, I think that's the case. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. But yeah, I think that, our children have an intuition and a knowing that what they realise works for them best. And I feel like as parents, as guardians of these beautiful little young people, that we have a responsibility to allow them to have a say in things.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the things that perhaps we've missed more recently is giving them those choices and to learn from those choices, because when you go out into the big world and put your big girl pants on, as you often say,
yes,
it's really scary. And if they haven't been given those opportunities when they are young to make certain decisions and to learn from that decision making, then where do they ever start?
Yeah,
where do they start?
It's the richness of discomfort, and I'm a big fan of people finding comfort in discomfort. I think we do it very poorly in society these days. So, I'm really grateful every time I get to witness my kids in this really, I guess, uncomfortable, sorry, just moving some things around here, uncomfortable position, and finding that comfort within that, because in fact, very often we will save people from themselves. We'll actually catch them before they fall. Now, if you're actually on top of the cliff, that's an ideal thing to do. But if you're on the proverbial cliff, you actually don't know if you fall off whether you're going to fly or land in water and still survive. You might get a bit wet, you might get a little bit dusty, but it's okay. And that's where the richness and wisdom of life is, those, what other people perceive to be bruises, because they're not experiencing that adversity or that scuffle firsthand. When you're in the mud, it's not necessarily difficulty. It's actually you get on with it, don't you?
Well, it feels a bit ugly and it might feel a bit horrible. But as many of us know as adults, some of our greatest outcomes have been through the messiness and through maybe a little bit of heartache or through some pain or through the discomfort.
What looks like discomfort? Because sometimes when you're in the discomfort, you realise that the mirage of the discomfort is actually more powerful than the actual experience.
Yes.
And I think that's often the case is we don't know what our mettle is until we are in that situation. So I'm a big fan of not saving my kids from themselves. I'm not going to put them in harm's way, but I'm not going to suddenly whip them out of what feels like a difficulty, because I want them to... I think that's the real resilience of this life, right? We talk about resilient kids, and often I see the resilient kids are kids that are in traumatic or abusive situations, and abusive is a very wide-reaching verb in this case, but abusive situations, and it's like if you can survive that, that's resilience. And I'm calling BS on that, because that's actually just a trauma being applied to a child. A child that is resilient is one who understands they are in charge and in control and are still making the decisions despite the difficulty of their environment, and they are supported. So that's where I think real resilience comes from. But we've got this false idea that resilience just comes from trauma, surviving trauma. And no wonder society is littered with victim and victim mentality, you know. But let's circle back, although I feel like you got all lit up for a second there. Well, you want to talk about something there, don't you?
No, well, one of the things, I mean, apart from the fact that I love hearing you share your wisdom, I really resonated with when you said feel supported. So I think where we have an opportunity with the kids is to provide them with those opportunities where we don't save them, or where we do give them choices and we do allow them to decide, but they feel supported in that. And what a beautiful opportunity when they're in under our wings as youngsters and as teenagers, because once they're out from underneath your wings, they're not going to feel maybe as supported or get that immediate support. So I feel like they are going to be braver in making decisions for themselves and perhaps take more risks and try new things, because we do support them as they're developing. And I just think that's an incredible gift we can give them. So that was the word I was thinking of when you were talking, was when you said that word support. I thought, yes, that's the opportunity that we have. Yeah. And that's where that resilience then does build, because if they get it wrong, it doesn't matter. It's not life or death in most circumstances, of course, unless they're at the top of that cliff. But, you know, they're supported through us being around them.
And I suppose we feel really strongly about the children getting to choose. And I mean, we've got a broad range of children in terms of our child range between us is sort of 8 to 18. So we've got the whole lot. But the 18-year-old is just a child as much as the 8-year-old, because we talk about an emotional maturity, and we talk about, I guess, like an empirical maturity in terms of how you're living your life and the decisions you're making. And so, you know, I think lots of us don't ever graduate from that childlike state until probably we move out of home and we really get to find out. Yes. But we obviously have brought that into their education. Yes. And I mean, I know I probably mention this every single podcast, but I feel so strongly about circuit breakers because a lot of our listeners are recovering school parents, aren't they? You know?
Or maybe considering what schooling environment is best for their child. Yeah.
And I mean, as we've talked about before, we are not prescriptive about education, but we are about understanding where the limitations and the failings and the opportunity to improve is. And the mechanism of the mainstream schooling system is such that it will take the groundswell to affect change. In the meanwhile, there's a bunch of us that are the minority, very much the minority, that are choosing to homeschool because we don't accept the product as it is, as being, you know, the best option for our kids. And so then when you get within that space, you have options about how that education unfolds. And as I've spoken about before, the greatest education teacher, certainly for alchemising it in our household, is our youngest, who is our most headstrong. And he just literally turns around and says, I'm not doing that. If he's not up for it, he's not up for it. And so rather than strong arm him into it, which is usually my modality of parenting, I'm just going to break your will so you know that I'm more powerful, which doesn't work for him either. So he's a painful teacher at times. It means that you have to get creative in the way that we approach education, so it's very much child-led or student-led. And some of the things that I was thinking about when you mentioned this was that even within that space, you kind of think, oh, gee, the kids should be grateful, The kids should be grateful that they get to choose their education. But even within that space, there's still resistance, and so they need support. And so there is an interesting thing where I really believe kids need boundaries to know where the edges are. They naturally want to explore. They naturally want to push against the edges. And so sometimes we need to jump them down or communicate, okay, that's a hard line. That one's got a little bit of malleability and we might be able to adjust that. So within that space of children choosing, where are the edges and where are the boundaries? Like one of the things I've created as a boundary is you got to do something. Like work on being audited. If nothing else, I need to show evidence that you are doing some form of education. So that's part of the responsibility of this agreement. You want to be at home and you want to educate at home. You still got to show up and do something that looks like work from a quantifiable perspective. And I think it's reasonable. It shows a discipline. They're doing stuff they don't want to do, like handwriting and things like that. Although having said that, in the mainstream schooling system, handwriting is becoming more and more obsolete as we move towards technology-based creations. So I think that there's definitely a case for creating expectations and agreements within that child-led or child decision-making around those education choices. But I'm curious because your children are older, so how do you create those boundaries or expectations or mutual agreements to then still allow them to decide on their education or make their choices?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think first and foremost, we need to understand what motivates them. And each child is different.
Yes. It'd be nice if they were all the same, out of the same package.
Well, it would make things so much more efficient.
Be boring, but good.
Yeah. So I think it's about really understanding what motivates them. And then, and the challenge is, of course, that you need to, especially when you've got, say, a number of children, in, say, your case, whereas I've got one who's just finished now and I'm only really dealing with one that's a homeschooler, although you never stop being a teacher to your children and being a guide. But, it's definitely about knowing what motivates them and, the boundaries, I think everyone needs a bit of structure in their life. I think without a doubt you need to have some structure in every day. Whether it be, I hear lots of people talking about this, but, whether it be that you spend an hour first thing after breakfast doing something that has an educational focus, a learning focus. So I think it's about having a structure in the day is really important, and even getting them to maybe, depending on their age again, setting up what that looks like for them.
Yeah.
Like, are they better in the mornings? Are they better after lunch? Are they better during, early evenings? Understanding when they're ready to engage, rather than, and you can't push because your 8-year-old will work better at a different time, to the eldest. So I think the boundaries can only come within knowing that child and that child's needs and putting in some form of a basic structure that has obviously flexibility throughout the day.
Yes. Well, I mean, that makes perfect sense because it's got to be informed. You wouldn't go and do a site survey on any given house block, if someone's engaged you actually go to the address. So you need to know what you're dealing with in the first place. And one thing I would say is a degree of fluidity is really important, because kids can change. And apart from sort of the obvious markers that happen through maturity, and I use maturity loosely because I'm talking about my teenagers who now think the natural time to wake up is about 10 o'clock in the morning. And, as you know, I wake up at 6, so I'm like 4 hours ahead of them into the day. And it's just unconscionable sort of wasting so much of the day to me. But again, that's a loaded statement. So you need to work within that. But one of the things I have done is I've brought in this really gifted teacher who's tutoring the kids. And so they're doing that once a week, and they're going to move up to twice a week. So what I've found, and I think this is the gold that a lot of people don't talk about when they move to homeschooling or they're thinking about homeschooling. I see a lot of comments in the forums and chat groups around the fact that little Johnny wanted to homeschool, and now they're homeschooling and they're doing XYZ program, and they're basically being delinquent, and the parent A and parent B are equally tearing their hair out, not sure what to do. And the whole thing has a force around it. And what naturally happens, and trust me, I've been guilty of this many times, is you tend to either threaten or carry through putting your kids back in school. Now, the issue with that is if you've decided that it is an environment that does not bring out the best in your child, and even worse, may actually create a level of trauma or distress for them, again, as we know, that's not resilience building at all, then you're basically creating a decision that is meeting a short-term need, and ultimately may lead to further problems down the track where we then have mental health issues and so forth. So one of the things that I made a deal with, not that I told the kids because I still occasionally threaten to send them back to school, you've got to have some leverage, right? Is I said I just won't do that. If I've decided it's not the best course forward, I won't do it. It's a bit like red food dye. We're never doing red food dye. That stuff is terrible for you. Can't go back. We're not doing red food dye. So, eat your heart out, dehydrated beetroot. It's not the same. So my point is, when you've made that decision, then that becomes a foundational decision. So then you need to have an agility on how to shape the kids' decision-making around what they want to do and how they're going to learn. And so bringing in this tutor has been brilliant because the kids have had resistance, but what we've done is we've built on their trust. She's extraordinary anyway. She's just really gifted, and she's really good at engaging the kids. Like, she actually likes children, which is really useful. That's why I'd be a terrible teacher. So from that point of view, she's ideal. But the other thing that she did the other day, which was so awesome, was she actually engaged all 4 of my kids. So only the 3 younger ones are the ones currently getting tutored. But she engaged all 4 of them in this art therapy education session. And the eldest was like, yeah, all right, I'll do it, sure, if it helps her family out. So he's a good kid. Anyway, at the end of it, he was like, that was awesome. I loved it. He got so much out of it, and it surprised him. And So it reaffirmed to me we must allow our children to be in the driver's seat of decision making. But having said that, there will be opportunities that present where we will need to push them through their resistance or perceived expectation of an experience and gain that trust. And so part of being the guiding ship for our children is to say, you got to give it a go. And then we decide if it's a no, right? Or in the case of a tutor, you got to find a way to work with it because this is something that actually we will, will progress and actually become really enjoyable, which is what it's turning out to be. So it's always a fine balance, isn't it? And I think sometimes people get caught up in the idea that, you let the kids decide. And it's like, no, you don't. Yeah, you don't give them the keys to the castle. You show them where they're kept and you say, I've got them when you need them. So it's about that shepherding and being the custodian of their education, but they still be the architect of it.
Absolutely, and I think it really is teamwork. As at its best when it comes to being the one that's in the driving seat with our kids' education, where we as parents get to decide, but the kids also get to decide through that approach of working together. So it is about introducing, it is about talking about the options, it is about looking at all the different opportunities, but then, and it may be about sometimes saying, well, actually, there might be a little bit of bribery. I know we will like a bit of that. There might be a little bit of bribery involved. There may even be a time where they're halfway through something and they kind of go, oh, no, I've had enough. And you kind of go, actually, I can see some real value if we just encourage them to go that little bit more. So I think your comment about trust, that's what happens. And when you think about this, when we're creating these educational experiences for our kids as a team, as a family unit, you just have to think about what you're building long term around relationships.
Yeah.
And I often get guided with my kids around, well, gosh, if that's how they operate around our house, how are they going to operate when they've got their own home, their own family? So there's those opportunities to really ensure that long-term that view is, okay, this is what's important around what we're educating them on. And what guides me a lot as a parent around what is important for our kids is life skills. Like, you can learn anything. You can read a textbook and you can do a course, when you're 30, 40, 50, 60. So, you never stop learning, but for me, I think it's around whatever the opportunities present, is it going to be a skill that they can build on? Yeah. And they can apply to relationships and, whether it be business relationships or personal relationships, because that's really the heart of our life, isn't it? Yeah. So, I think that trust is a really big thing, but knowing that, yes, the kids need to have a decision, need to have a choice. We can guide that. Yeah. But ultimately, they will only be motivated if they feel like it's going to add value to them. Yeah. Or it's going to have some purpose for them.
Yeah, they've got to see the applicability. And I think that's where sometimes people hit those speed humps or roadblocks when they do move to a home education system and they basically apply one of those fully formed programs that they essentially do at home. And there's, again, that lack of sort of consent or spaciousness for the kid to say, I'm really interested in this, And I do wonder with kids whether they have an interest in such a broad range of topics. I think it's a very adult mentality to learn a bit of this, bit of that, bit of that, and bit of that. Because most kids, if you think about how their mind develops, as toddlers, they'll be really focused on one thing and they'll be really focused on achieving a certain goal within that, building blocks, Lego. They don't get a new Lego box, start building it, get 10 minutes into it and go, boring. I mean, my kids, anytime they've done Lego, have sat there until they've completed it, even if it's like an impolite time of night. So they're very focused on achieving that outcome when they're invested. For some reason, adults have decided that kids need a bit of this, a bit of that, and a bit of that. And one of the things I always remember my daughter said, and this was her specific experience, was that because she wasn't finishing her work in a timely fashion, because they'd be jumping topics, right? This is like grade 4. What would happen is it would get to lunchtime, and because she hadn't completed it, she'd be kept in at lunchtime to complete it. Now, partly that was helpful to her because she got it finished, but partly it was unhelpful because she didn't get to defrag outside and go play with her friends. So there was actually a bit of punishment. And so her learning around that was it's not great to finish things. So now I have a kid that I'm trying to re-establish trust in finishing a project because she's a fire starter. She starts a fire over here, she starts a fire over there, and then she buggers off. And no one's holding the fire extinguisher, and certainly no one's checking it doesn't begin, start a bushfire. And I say to her, there'll be a level of satisfaction when you close something out. when you reach the end point and finish that. And I'm not saying school is completely responsible for that. I'm saying that there is a contribution within that association with learning for her that was, it doesn't pay to finish. So, because she's just scrambling to keep up. Now, the thing about home education is you can chuck the clock out the window. You don't need to observe that. Things take as long as they take. If you're doing a program, maybe they do, maybe they don't, and that's up to the individual program. But I guess what I'm saying is look at those things. Be curious, be curious, like our friend Quinn here, about what it is that could be I guess an obstacle for your child as to why they're not doing something, and work out that discernment of when to push, when to hold the line, and when to hand them back autonomy over that decision making.
Yeah, totally. And that's a constant juggle, isn't it? That's a constant sort of, there needs to be, with everything in life, a degree of flexibility. And I feel like, I can see how, within your daughter's experience around having to finish a task, how finishing that task just becomes hard and ugly and boring. But then there's also the real value in just finishing it. Yeah. Sometimes things are like that. My son's a great starter. He's a great starter. He really is. He's a great starter. He's a great starter. And, you've got to kind of realise that they do have their skill set and understanding what it is. So I have to be really clear within knowing him that he loves solving problems. Loves it. Give him a problem, he'll happily solve it. But don't give him the same problem time and time and time and time and time. He just after the second time, it's like, move on. So it really is about knowing your child and what works for them. And this is the gift of being in charge of their learning. Is, again, you can target their learning to suit them. And that's when you can get them engaged. And that's when you can choose the topics that they like and choose the timing on it. And I love the way you said, we can throw the clock out the window. We really can. Because we don't have to be efficient. We don't have to finish a curriculum by a certain date or have them test ready by a certain date or any of those other things. We can just allow for them to work at their own pace. Now, of course, there's going to be times where you need to, perhaps you have one who works really, really slow. And perhaps you sort of see it that there's, maybe a methodology that they have to follow everything step by step by step. And then, that's where you kind of go, well, actually, that's not really that important with this task. Let's try and build that skill set where you can actually skip a step and you can actually be a bit more creative. And, so I think that that's definitely knowing the child and knowing their learning style and knowing what lights them up and knowing what motivates them is what's going to be the guiding principles and maybe the boundaries around how do we allow them to decide. But I really feel like this whole topic also around letting them decide, because we hear a lot of parents and people in society talking about how we don't have enough resilience. And there's also risk aversion. That's Kids
right.
Are scared to make a decision.
I know.
They're
or failure too.
Or they're scared to fail at something. So, that giving them those opportunities to decide whatever it is for themselves during their education is such a gift again. Because then they aren't as afraid when they get out into the big wide world to make the occasional mistake or to go, oh God, that didn't work very well, did it? Oh well, it doesn't matter. Keep going. Try something else.
That refractory period gets shortened and they extract the wisdom from it. And I think that's one of the things as a parent that I would say to other parents is do take care to not look at the timing of things, because that sometimes kids need a period of stagnancy to work out what they want to learn or what the next things is that they want to focus on. And I see that, I see myself doing it too, trying to manhandle where their education is going to go. And I see outside influences trying to manhandle or shape the education. And whilst that's adults wanting the best for these kids, it's not organic in that way, and the kids aren't having that discovery for themselves, of having the idea themselves. It's being gifted and done for them. So again, we are robbing them from that opportunity. The kids have to get quiet and bored sometimes. They have to be in some place of inactivity to then work out what they're going to do next, because eventually they throw their hands up in the air and they go, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, right, it's time to do something then, isn't it? What do you want to do? Do you want to look at this? Do you want to look at that? And then when I've suggested a bunch of things and they've basically been refused, I say, right, decision's in your hand. Go listen to something, go read something, and let's choose a topic to look at. And so we come back to that. And I keep saying to them, the English, the literacy, the reading, the writing, that's all a byproduct of stuff you're interested in. But you don't know what you're interested in until you start looking. And there's heaps of interesting things out there.
Loads. And I do think that, as one of our dear friends who loves to do, education in nature, if you're in that stuck position, well, just get out and do something active.
Yeah.
Let's not force it upon them, because once you get out in nature, if you do a little walk or you go to a beach or you go to a park, that's the opportunity to just sort of chat and talk about things outside of the family home or outside of the traditional learning environment, and to get out and just start engaging him and then finding out what it is. And then you might suddenly find there's a topic in the conversation that you can go, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I wonder how we can find out more about that. And then bingo, you've got the topic. Yeah. And then they're actually deciding.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because literally this morning I was with QK3 and we were learning about hidden secrets of the Sphinx in Egypt. And somehow we then got onto sacred geometry. And the next thing McGill says to QK3, would you like an apple? And he's like, no, yeah, sure. And so then McGill cut it as a transverse section, and we looked at the sacred geometry of the apple, right, which is like a 5-point star. And so then we started looking around what else we could find as sacred geometry. And I don't know that he was particularly lit up. I think he was just trying to absorb the information, but I can feel the springboard of how we'll be able to apply that in our environment, in our outside environment, which I love being in nature, and I love the kids being in nature and finding the application of that information, and then using that as a springboard to learn about what does sacred geometry mean, and like all those sort of things. And suddenly you're covering a multitude of topics, but more than that, it's interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Which, don't we want education to be interesting?
Well, I feel like it's worthy of that. Like, we are lifelong learners.
Yes.
So we want to embrace that and see it as just an everyday thing rather than a formal. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. It can be a very relaxed, everyday opportunity.
Absolutely.
So, I just kind of think that we just need to make sure, again, that we tune in to our kids. Yeah. I just feel like and we won't always get it right. There's many times where I put up a block and sort of say, I'm not listening right now, or I don't have time for this. Yes. But I tell you what, where I really feel the magic is when I actually stop for a couple of minutes and I see that they're ready to talk about something. I go, tell me. Yeah. Or give me your perspective on that. Yeah. And that's when you get to know them that little bit more. And then you kind of go, right, this is where we can take it. So our kids are really intuitively smart. They know what lights them up. They know what they need. And that's probably what I would love to say as part of this conversation, is that they know what they need. And we just need to get out of their way and allow them to experience it, and to allow them to make certain decisions and to learn from those decisions. And they may not work out the way they hoped or thought that it would, but gee, they're going to learn something from it. Absolutely, and they'll feel empowered in the process. And that empowerment is invaluable. I think so too. I mean, I think that's the richness of the life experience, So love it, Curious Quinn. As always, bringing the gold, starting out strong. Cherry popped, well done us. Cherry popped. We can go have a proverbial cigarette now. Or a glass of wine.
Oh, yes, why not?
Although it's too early in the day, maybe.
It's past midday somewhere in the world. That's a rule.
Totally.
Exactly. Until next time, beautiful people, and hopefully not too long. We've got our skates back on, so we'll be talking again soon.
We love these conversations, so thanks for being here with us.
Good on you. Be well.